The rumble of the massive warship's engines vibrated through the hull, shaking Lieutenant Anna Harris from her thoughts. The ship's artificial gravity barely noticed the shift in pressure, but her stomach churned nonetheless. Through the observation deck's thick glass, Earth's horizon stretched below her, half hidden by clouds and a faint, golden light from the setting sun. The peaceful sight only heightened the weight of the moment. 5 minutes, came the voice of General Marcus Reyes over the comm system. His voice was as solid and unwavering as his reputation, but there was an edge to it today, an unspoken acknowledgement of what was at stake. Anna's gaze shifted to the mission briefing displayed on the holographic panel before her. She'd read it a dozen times, but the words still felt surreal. Humanity, after centuries of isolation from galactic conflict, now enters a war against an enemy that's never been beaten. The Krath, the most feared, relentless conquerors in the galaxy, were now on Earth's doorstep. The Krath didn't negotiate. They didn't conquer, they annihilated. And Earth? Earth had never fought back against anything like them before. Until now. Anna clenched her fists. It was all coming down to this moment, to humanity's first real engagement. The Krath had made their advance through the galaxy with lightning speed, and every attempt at resistance had crumbled before their overwhelming might. No one had even made it a week, let alone a year. The human fleet had barely formed in time, and yet they had no choice but to fight. But there was something the Krath hadn't counted on, humanity's unpredictability. Beside her, the tension in the air crackled, palpable even among the seasoned crew. Anna's gaze flitted over the other officers, each of them focused on their stations, the weight of history pressing down on them all. She had the strategy, the plans, the perfect blueprint to take down their flagship. She had to make it work. Main characters introduced. Lieutenant Anna Harris, a tactical genius, cool under fire, driven by a fierce love for her home and her people. Young but sharp, she's been tasked with leading the counteroffensive against the Krath's invasion. General Marcus Reyes, the battle-hardened leader of Earth's unified defense forces, his experience is unmatched, but even he can feel the tremors of doubt. He believes in humanity's potential, but this is uncharted territory. Commander Zorath, the Krath, a calculating, merciless leader of the Krath invasion forces. He believes that humanity is a primitive species, fit only for eradication, but he underestimates their resolve. Anna's wrist communicator buzzed. She flipped it open. "Lieutenant, we're ready to engage," came Rhea's voice, firm and decisive. "This is it. Execute your plan." Her stomach tightened. The plan was simple, straightforward. It needed to be. Strike fast, strike hard, neutralize their shields with a concentrated burst of electromagnetic pulses. Take out their command deck. Before they could adjust. Before they could retaliate. But no matter how well crafted the plan, nothing ever went as expected. Not in battle. She turned to face the viewport once more, her breath steadying. Below, the vast shapes of the Krath ships loomed, their dark forms cutting through the sky like shadows of doom. Their flagship, massive and unyielding, hung in orbit, a symbol of death incarnate. There was no escaping it, no retreat. The only choice was forward. "Lieutenant," came Reyes again, his voice sharper this time. "How long until we're in range?" 2 minutes, she replied, her voice steady. She glanced at the crew around her, noting the nervous glances, the tight jaws, the silent prayers. But they were ready. She could see that. They were ready because they knew the consequences of failure. A soft ping on the control panel interrupted her thoughts. A transmission, encrypted. It was from Earth's orbital defense network. She tapped the screen, pulling up the message. "Warning, enemy fleet approaching. Reinforcements expected." Her heart skipped a beat. Reinforcements? The Krath had reinforcements? It hadn't been mentioned in any of the reports. Earth's fleet was already outnumbered. "General," she said, voice colder now. "The Krath are bringing more ships. This isn't just a strike force." The general's voice came back, clipped. "Understood. Hold your position. We're committed now. No turning back. Anna's mind raced, calculating. The initial strike was still their best chance, but with reinforcements arriving, their window of opportunity was shrinking. She gripped the edge of the console. She had one shot. Engage when ready, she ordered, steadying her voice. The ship jolted forward as the fleet adjusted its course. The blip of enemy ships grew larger, clearer on the radar. But it wasn't just the fleet she was worried about, it was the flagship, the heart of the Krath's war machine. If they failed here, if they couldn't make a dent in that ship. The ship's cannons roared as the first volley was fired. Anna's breath caught in her chest, her hands never leaving the console. The air was thick with tension, every officer holding their breath as they waited for the inevitable reaction. The Krath flagship shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if sensing the incoming strike. And then, an explosion rocked the ship. Red warning lights blinked across every station, alarms blaring in the background. The electromagnetic pulse had landed, but the shields flickered, absorbing the impact. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Anna's heart sank, her mind racing for a new plan. The Krath were no longer just invading, they were retaliating, and they were faster, more adaptable than any of her projections had predicted. Lieutenant, General Reyes's voice came again, heavy with urgency. We need a new strategy. Now. Anna's mind worked faster, but this wasn't just about tactics anymore. This was survival. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting for their very existence. The human fleet had barely begun to regroup when the next wave of Krath ships emerged from the blackness of space, their dark silhouettes gleaming with ominous purpose. Anna Harris's fingers were trembling slightly as she watched the readouts flash across her command console. The Krath had brought reinforcements, and their numbers seemed endless. Her heart beat faster, the weight of the situation settling deeper into her bones. General, the Krath fleet's doubled in size, she reported, her voice cool, but the edge of urgency creeping in. They're preparing to strike back. This won't be just a counteroffensive, they're going for total annihilation. She heard the low rumble of General Marcus Reyes's voice through the comm, a mixture of grim determination and forced calm. I know, Lieutenant. But we don't have the luxury of retreating anymore. The fight comes to us now. I need you to act, not plan. She exhaled slowly, fighting the knot of tension in her chest. Acting without a plan wasn't her style, never had been. But she had no choice. The Krath were here, and they weren't waiting for her to catch up. The hum of the ship's engines was drowned out by the alarms blaring across the bridge. Red lights bathed the room in an unsettling hue. Anna's hands flew across the console, scanning through her tactical maps, pinpointing weak spots in the enemy formations. Time was slipping away, each second bringing the Krath closer to devastating Earth's fragile defenses. Deploy the electromagnetic pulse again. I'll target the smaller vessels and push them out of the formation, she ordered, her voice sharp as a whip. She could already see the opening. If they couldn't break the fleet apart now, their chances would plummet. Her fingers hovered over the controls. You've got one shot, she thought, the weight of the decision grounding her. The Krath weren't stupid. Their ships had learned from the first strike, and their shields were already adapting, shifting to absorb more of the blast. She needed to hit them in a way they didn't expect. Fire when ready, she commanded, and the ship's weapon systems fired in sync with her instructions. The pulse shot out, a brilliant wave of energy that lashed through space. For a brief moment, the enemy fleet flickered, their shields buckling under the force. It was enough to disrupt their momentum, just as she'd hoped. But then the shockwave reverberated back. The Krath had adjusted their shields too quickly, and their larger ships began retaliating, weapons fire streaking through the vacuum. The human fleet was still reeling from the initial attack, barely holding their ground. A barrage of laser fire exploded across their starboard side, and the ship shuddered violently. Anna grabbed the edge of the console, steadying herself as the lights flickered, then returned to normal. A thick silence filled the room before the comm crackled to life again. We're taking heavy losses, one of the crew members reported from a distant section of the ship. Shields are at 50%. Anna's gut twisted. Not good enough. She turned back to the screens, her mind racing. What else? What else do we have left? General, she said, her voice steady despite the panic seeping beneath. If we don't create a breach in their formation, we'll be overrun. We can't keep defending like this. The general's voice crackled back with a grim, almost detached calm. Then it's time for us to make our own opening. I'm giving the order for a direct assault. Prepare your strike team. You've got 5 minutes. Her stomach dropped. A direct assault against a flagship of the Krath? They hadn't even taken out their small ships yet. There was no way they could get close enough to the command ship to make a difference. She opened her mouth to protest, but the general's voice cut through the static. You'll have backup. We have one more surprise up our sleeves. The new fighter drones. If you can get close enough, we'll have an opening for you. Anna's gaze flicked to the corner of the room where the fighter drones were being prepped. Smaller, faster, and deadlier than anything Earth had deployed before, these drones had been designed specifically to breach the Krath's outer defenses. She had a fleeting moment of hope, but it quickly morphed into a sinking realization. No matter how good the technology, they were still vastly outnumbered. I'll need a full tactical team, she replied, her voice laced with determination. And I'll need you to keep those drones distracted. Don't let them get picked off. Reyes's voice softened for just a moment. We'll buy you time, Lieutenant. Make it count. With a sudden, sharp breath, Anna pushed past the rising panic. She couldn't afford hesitation. There were lives on the line. She was the one who had to lead them, and if they failed now, it wouldn't just be the end of the fleet. It would be the end of everything. Turning to the officers, she spoke rapidly. I need a team of 10 for the strike mission. Let's move. The atmosphere on the bridge shifted. Tension became action as the team scrambled to prepare for the most dangerous mission they'd ever been assigned. Anna's mind flickered back to the Krath forces, unrelenting, merciless, and hungry for victory. The countdown had begun. Prepare for immediate deployment, Anna said, her voice colder than it had ever been before. This is our only chance. As the ship's doors slid open, the hum of the engines rose in the background, growing louder as her team moved into position. Outside, the battlefield was a chaos of gunfire, explosions, and chaos. But Anna felt an unfamiliar calm settle over her. This wasn't about tactics anymore. It wasn't even about the fleet. This was personal. She had no choice now but to go forward. The hangar bay's metal walls hummed with life, the chaotic noises of battle muffled by the thick armor of the ship. The sharp scent of ozone and sweat filled Anna Harris's nostrils as she stood before the fighter drones, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on her. Her fingers brushed over the cold steel of the drone's control panel, a brief moment of reassurance amidst the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. She had never led a strike this dangerous. In fact, she'd never even thought the human fleet could take on something like the Krath. But here they were, hurtling toward the heart of the enemy's formation with everything on the line. The mission was simple: breach the flagship's defenses, disable its weapons systems, and provide an opening for the fleet to land a killing blow. A loud clang echoed as a hatch slid open. Her team, 10 strong, filed into the bay, their faces etched with determination and fear, but they didn't speak. No words were needed. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate, and every one of them knew the stakes. Anna met each of their eyes, the faces of young men and women who'd joined this fight believing they had a chance. She couldn't afford to let them down. Ready for this, Lieutenant? Commander Jonas Miles, her second-in-command, asked, his voice rough. He was the most seasoned officer in the group, but even he looked uneasy, his helmet tucked under his arm. Anna nodded, checking her own helmet and tightening her flight suit. The ship had taken heavy hits earlier, and there was no telling what awaited them in the black expanse beyond. We don't have a choice, Commander. We go in, hit them hard, and keep moving. Stick to the plan, don't let anything distract you. Jonas gave a tight-lipped smile, his eyes flicking over the rest of the team. I'm not worried about that, ma'am. It's just the Krath. We've been fighting them for centuries. We'll get through it. Anna didn't share his optimism. She'd seen the Krath in action, and their ability to adapt, to retaliate, had been unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. This wasn't like any fight they'd ever been in before. The Krath didn't just kill, they obliterated every vestige of their enemy's resistance. But she couldn't let fear show. Not now. All right, Anna said, snapping herself back to the task at hand. Let's move out. Stay sharp. The team filed into their drones, the sounds of their suits locking into place filling the room. Anna climbed into her own cockpit, settling into the seat as the interface screen powered up. The sterile cockpit felt eerily silent, but the distant thrum of the ship's engines grounded her. She adjusted the controls, watching as the intricate HUD came to life. Every system blinked green, signaling they were ready. A soft ping signaled that they were cleared for launch. The heavy doors of the hangar bay opened, and the vacuum of space flooded in, a cold, silent expanse that stretched out before them. The drone's engines roared to life, and with a sharp tug, Anna shot out into the void, her breath steady as the countdown to impact began. She immediately switched to tactical mode, scanning the Krath flagship. It was massive, far larger than any ship she'd ever seen, and its defenses were formidable. They had mere minutes before the enemy could recalibrate their weapons and overwhelm their position. She could almost feel the weight of their gaze, as if the Krath knew they were coming. Enemy turrets activating, Jonas's voice crackled through the comms, his tone edged with the same anxiety that gnawed at her gut. They're locking onto us. Just keep moving, Anna snapped, tapping into the drone's evasive maneuvers. She sent a pulse of energy to the engines, sending her drone into a sharp roll. The vacuum of space outside seemed alive with fire as Krath laser cannons streaked past, barely missing her. The sudden rush of movement sent a surge of adrenaline flooding through her veins, but there was no time to savor it. The flagship loomed ahead, its massive dark hull looming in the distance. Locking in, she muttered under her breath, fingers dancing across the controls. Her drone's targeting system hummed in her ear, calculating the best angle for the strike. This was it, the point of no return. A burst of heat blasted across her console. She instinctively swerved, just in time to avoid a direct hit, but the blast was close enough to jolt her nerves. The Krath weren't playing games anymore. They had locked on. The seconds stretched into eternity as she fought for control, gritting her teeth as she forced the drone into a sharp dive, narrowly dodging another strike. We can't keep this up, Jonas's voice echoed, strained. They're too fast. Focus, Commander. Anna snapped, heart pounding. We'll breach their shields now. We take out the smaller interceptors, then we make the opening. Ahead, the flagship's defenses pulsed, a complex dance of shield energy. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to deter most attacks. Anna's mind whirled as she analyzed the weakest point. She could see it now, a slight ripple in their shielding, the perfect breach. If she could hit it with enough force, they could break through. Her fingers hovered over the command key. Anna, look out! Jonas's voice rang out, warning her just as a Krath interceptor shot past her. Its laser beams lit up her screen. But Anna wasn't fast enough. The interceptor clipped the edge of her drone. Sparks exploded across her console as the impact sent her spinning out of control. For a moment, all she could hear was the shrill alarm, her heart thundering in her chest. But there was no time for panic. Keep it together, Harris. Jonas shouted over the comms. You're still in this. Her hands flew to the emergency controls. With a growl of frustration, she regained control, righting her drone and locking onto the target. There was no retreat now. There was only one chance left. Brace for impact, she whispered, eyes narrowing. And then she fired. The enemy flagship loomed before Anna, its imposing black hull and shielded layers standing firm like a wall of darkness. Her pulse throbbed in her temples, the weight of every choice she'd made crashing down upon her. Her fighter drone, now battered from the relentless assault, vibrated with every movement as she attempted to steady it in the cold, vast expanse of space. Behind her, Jonas's voice crackled through her comm, but it was muffled by the distant, deafening roar of enemy fire. "Harris, you're almost there. Just hold together for a few more seconds." Jonas's voice held the faintest edge of desperation, but also fierce determination. He was still fighting to keep the Krath at bay, but his voice was a reminder that the clock was running out. Anna's hands clenched the controls, eyes narrowing as she locked her sights on the critical weak point in the Krath flagship's energy field. The breach was there, just as she'd calculated earlier, a tiny flicker of vulnerability in the shield's perfect structure. Every instinct told her that now was the moment. There would be no second chances. Her breath was shallow, focused. The harsh, rhythmic whine of the drone's engines, the blur of stars, the violent flashes from the Krath turrets, everything blurred as she centered herself. "Fire when ready," she muttered under her breath, her voice a razor-thin whisper of resolve. With a surge, she fired. The weapon's pulse shot forward, a streak of brilliant blue light, as the drone's proximity alarms screamed in protest. Time slowed. She watched, unblinking, as the pulse collided with the shield and detonated. The flagship's defenses rippled and shuddered, giving way like a cracked dam, leaving the heart of the ship exposed. Anna's hand slammed into the throttle. "Come on," she whispered, watching her drone surge forward, the vastness of the ship filling her view. But the Krath were already retaliating. Dozens of small interceptors dove toward her, their engines roaring as they sliced through the void. Laser blasts streaked across her view, an overwhelming barrage that forced her to weave and roll with every inch of her training. Her body moved reflexively, instinctual and practiced, dodging fire, staying alive. The ship was massive, but it was also a target. Her heart slammed in her chest as the next wave of energy beams slammed against her shields, sending a violent shockwave through her. A jolt, followed by a terrifying creak of metal, sent her drone spinning. The momentary blackout of her HUD forced a curse out of her lips. The ship's weapons systems were locking onto her. "Jonas," she yelled, gritting her teeth as her hands tightened on the controls. The sensors flared, flashing a red warning. There was no more time. A voice cut through the chaos. "Harris, I have you covered." Jonas's voice brought a brief moment of clarity. A bright flare of light flared in the distance as a squadron of drones tore through the Krath's smaller ships, a perfect diversion. Jonas's team had launched a full assault, drawing the Krath's fire away from her. Anna didn't waste a second. With her target locked, she throttled her drone's engines to full power, heading straight for the exposed heart of the flagship. The Krath were momentarily distracted, but that wasn't enough. She had to finish this now. She was closing in. The flagship's center was just within reach. Her mind raced, calculating the trajectory, the angle, the best possible way to disable its core. Her every instinct screamed for action. The final blow was within her grasp. Her hand hovered over the missile release button, the weight of history pressing down on her. Every second counted. Every millisecond could determine the fate of humanity. A shrill alarm echoed in her ears. The flagship's secondary weapons systems were locking onto her, and the only thing standing between her and certain destruction was a razor-thin shield that was flickering weakly. The lights on her console blinked erratically. This was it. Anna exhaled sharply, her body tense. She gritted her teeth and slammed her fist into the release button. "Fire!" she screamed. The missile streaked forward, a white-hot comet of destruction. It crashed into the center of the Krath flagship with a sound that reverberated in the vacuum, a gut-wrenching boom that seemed to shake the very stars. For a moment, everything went still. Space itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, the flagship exploded. It wasn't just a simple explosion. The force that erupted was cataclysmic, an immense wave of energy that sent shockwaves across the battlefield. The nearby Krath ships faltered, their formations breaking apart as they scrambled to regroup. The debris of the flagship scattered in all directions, a massive, fiery cloud that illuminated the darkness of space. Anna's heart skipped a beat as she checked her status. The blast had knocked her drone off course, but she was still alive. She was still moving. "We did it," Jonas said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he could scarcely believe it. "We actually did it." But Anna didn't allow herself to relax. She knew the Krath weren't finished, they'd retreat for now, but this wasn't over. They had won a battle, not the war. Still, she let herself savor the moment for a breath. As her team regrouped and began the long journey back to the fleet, Anna looked out through her cockpit window at the debris floating around her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel the tiniest glimmer of hope. This was their moment. Humanity had faced the darkness and fought back. Against all odds, they had proven that they were more than just survivors. They were conquerors. And they would not be defeated.